So today's session is really about how we can improve our engagement on a long-term basis as well. Although the kernel is often someone's getting involved at something that they feel passionately about, something that's close to where they live, something that's going to impact their livelihood, their housing, for example, or childcare. And then people then step back often and start thinking more broadly about issues that are more broad or long-term at the city. In fact, one of our presenters, Rosalind, was saying to me today that she was starting to think a little bit about from where she was working in the arts community to what are the broader issues that the city and governments in Toronto are managing and addressing as well, which has taken her to where she is right now, which she'll talk about in a minute as well. So I just wanted to say welcome and to let you know that of all the engagement work that we do at the city, we post a great deal of that information on the city's website. I have a screenshot from our public consultation slide up here behind me. And I also just wanted to let you know who was here in the room with me. I'm hoping this is going to work. A little delay, I think.
That doesn't match that.
Anyway, I can just tell you who is here with me. Rich is in our office, in the city manager's office, and he's the lead staff for the Participatory Budgeting pilot, which is entering its third year now. And Rosalind's here from the Toronto Foundation and is going to speak to you a little bit about the Vital Signs initiative at the city. And Paula Chung will be joining us to talk about the city's annual budget in consultations that happen and the information that the city produces to assist the public in engaging on the annual budget process. So what we thought we would just do is give a brief presentation about each of those. Rob Rossini, our Chief Financial Officer, has just walked in. Hi, Rob. Great presentation, by the way. Thank you. So just to continue, they were being joined by some additional people online as well. And I think we're just going to turn this over maybe briefly to Rich to give a brief overview of the participatory budgeting pilot, and then over to Rosalind. And then either the other Rosalind or Paula will be joining us to talk about the city's budget. So I'm just going to get Rich's slides up here so I can do that. Rich, do you want to introduce yourself maybe? There you go.
Is it up?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're talking about big things today in the sessions, and I hope you'll move between them and share as many ideas and have discussions. I'm here to share a little bit about something particular we're doing on a small scale that we want to learn from and potentially go big with this. It's called Participatory Budgeting, and we're piloting it in 3 communities in Toronto, and we're going to these communities and asking them the question, how would you spend $250,000 to improve your community or your neighborhood? And what's interesting about it is that it's an open process. Participatory budgeting has actually been done in a number of cities around the world, including New York and Chicago and in Europe and all through the States and in every country almost. There's projects going on, but each city does it its own way. So we're piloting participatory budgeting in Toronto over 3 years. This is our last year, where we're going into 3 communities. One is Ward 33 up around Fairview Mall. One is in Ward 12 near Jane and Lawrence area, and one is out in Scarborough, east, out near Pharmacy and Danforth. And we're going to those communities with a clear invitation, saying, first, come to us, join us with your neighbors, and share your idea for how you would improve your community. Then we're going to collect all those ideas, bring them together, and you're going to develop them with your neighbors and talk about the ideas, and then you're actually going to vote on them. And I'm going to show you what a bit about that looked like in the last 2 years. So when we bring together people in the room, it's a lot like these workshops. Some are very small, some are very big, but in every case, people are telling us great things about what they want to see. We want this in my park, or can you fix something in the street, something around the transportation? We invite them to think about projects on public property. So we're in parks, streets, sidewalks, things like that. And we invite them to put their ideas on Post-it notes. And so we've had these great meetings where people of all ages come together and bring their own interests, and they collect the ideas. Last year, in the 3 neighborhoods, we collected over 300 ideas from people. And there were similar themes. It was very interesting. People, and I'm sure if you may be thinking about how you would spend $250,000 right now, people had similar things. The kids talked a lot about how they interact with parks, but they also talked about how they moved around neighborhoods and say, when I walk to school, I do this, and there's a spot here that I'd love to fix. People who have been very established in the neighborhoods have seen it change over the years and still were very optimistic and said, well, I would change this, or I would maybe fix this. We collected all these ideas and we brought them, we had certain rules to play with in participatory budgeting. They have to be under $250,000. They have to be a thing that you can build and not a program. Although any ideas that we got for, say, a lunch program or a new library or a big community center, we kept and we would share them with our city colleagues. But ultimately, we invited the neighbors back to look at the shortlisted ideas, those that were eligible. And what they did was, it was great to see people see their ideas up on the board and see other people join them and say, yeah, I think that's a good idea. What would you change this and change this? And people even stood up. We invited them to stand up at the session and, much like we're doing later today with the best idea, stand up and say, well, this is the idea I had, and this is why I think that we should vote on this. And we created a ballot. And if you were 14 or older and you lived in that neighborhood, we invited you back to actually vote. And it was just like the elections. We had election services there and things, and people filled out a ballot, and they had 3 choices about what they could build in their communities. And we had over 1,000 votes cast last year. So this is the 2nd year in a pilot. We test things about how do people know about it and how do people learn. And people tell us, which is great. It's really nice to be part of a process that we're learning as well. And we had youth volunteers, we had senior volunteers, we had everybody out pulling votes and stuff, much like you would see in elections, campaigning for their favorite project, or just coming in and saying, well, this all looks great. I think we should vote for everything, is what we heard a couple times. And in the first 2 years, we've got some great projects going in the communities. We've got new lighting for parks that people felt needed new lighting. We've got new amenities like, how many people have seen these ping pong tables that are sprouting up like dandelions all through our city? They're great new things and people are voting for these. This is a fitness park out near Fairview Mall where people can now exercise in a park. We're building walking trails through parks. We're changing the public realm, the sidewalks, making them more welcoming. Out in Scarborough there, we just had a meeting this week about the mural that's coming to an underpass that was graffiti covered and sort of a bridge that people didn't want to go under. But now they're going to build a mural there, or they're going to paint a mural there to engage the community. What we invite you to share your ideas and your feedback on participatory budgeting today is what do you think when I describe the process like this? What could we learn about how to be more transparent about how things are built in communities? How do we really make sure we reach everyone in a process like this? We are thinking forward about how this can be bigger beyond our 3 pilot areas. So how do we reach people? And how do we actually make them give everybody power to feel like they can have ideas and go through a process like this? And in the end, does the process actually foster local decision making? What can we learn from it? What can we learn from other processes? And what can we move forward on in terms of how people engage in their community, how they meet their neighbors, how they have decision making in other fora that the city offered like this, and the next development project to come up, or the next park project to change. How does local decision making benefit that process? So we'll invite you to, this is just an example of something we're trying. We welcome your thoughts about it today as we go through our session.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. Appreciate that. I'm now just going to turn over to Rosalind, who's going to talk a bit about the Vital Signs Initiative and its connection to civic engagement at the city. Rosalind.
Thanks, Meg. And hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our session. I want to tell tell you a little bit about the Toronto Foundation for those of you who might not be familiar with the foundation, a little bit about the power of community philanthropy, and how we use our Toronto's Vital Signs report to engage community and talk about the quality of life in our city, and how we might collectively begin to think about how we could invest in the city together. So first of all, Toronto Foundation. It's one of almost 200 community foundations that are across the country and one of almost 2,000 around the world. So there is this large, growing philanthropic movement where individuals can gather, talk about issues in their city, and pool their philanthropic resources to have a greater impact than they could on their own. So at the Toronto Foundation, we've had several city visionaries who came together in 1981 and said, we want to make our city the best it can be. And they talked about how we could gather other individuals and other families and build a pool of community funding that we could begin to think about how we would use our Vital Signs report to inform discussions about where we could begin to invest that community endowment. If you turn to the middle of the section here, you'll see about 50 things that you might not have known about of your city. You might have come to today's session not having really thought about an $11 billion budget that the city spends every year, and how do we look at that in a fully integrated way. And we're hoping that many more people will learn more about their city by reading this report every year, because we have a particular view of how we look at the city. And it's a holistic view, looks at 10 different issue areas that we actually think are interconnected. And we believe that discussions about how we can build a better city should be thought about from that integrated way. So when we're talking about investing as an example, and we're talking about investing in transportation, we know that that's going to give us a lot of great benefits for getting across our city, but it's also going to give us great environmental benefits. It's also going to give us great health benefits. So we really want to think about things in a new way and begin to integrate these discussions so that we can have a more powerful impact together. I want to tell you a few stories in particular about how we've used the report over the years. Some of you might remember in 2005, Toronto experienced some violence that we hadn't seen ever before. And it was a massive increase of youth-on-youth violence. And that summer became known as the Summer of the Gun. And there were many discussions about community safety that were happening across the city. And so what we thought we could do is act as a convener of many of these discussions and talk about the issues together. And so we brought representatives from City Hall, we brought together the 2 school boards, we brought together the United Way and the YMCA, and we began to talk about what we were seeing in the report. And not only were we seeing big drop-offs in high school completion, we were also seeing big drop-offs in recreational participation of youth. We were also seeing massive youth unemployment, and we were seeing what we thought to be the overarching result, which was this youth-on-youth violence. And through the dialogue of learning more about these particular issue areas and about the people who were experiencing them, we said, what could we do together? How could we create a response to this together and then invest together to have better outcomes? And so we came up with this idea basically of a coaching institute where we would ask grade 11 teachers across the city to try to identify someone in their class who had a little bit of athletic capability, who had a little bit of leadership ability, but maybe was just going off the rails a little bit. And to offer that student the opportunity to learn how to become a swim instructor, a lifeguard, or a soccer or basketball coach. And together, the partners put together this coaching institute and this fairly rigorous program that the kids had to go through over a 6-month period. And they graduated having received national certifications, which they could use anywhere across the country. And over 12 years, we've been able to graduate almost 2,000 youth through this program, and almost 65% of them have received jobs in these areas in which they've been trained. So that's the kind of outcome that dialogue can have. And when people and partners get together to co-create a concept, and then everybody say, yes, we'll all invest our resources together to have outcomes that none of us could have had on our own. And we hope that that kind of unique model can be used in many other places, and I can see that the city is using it in this kind of participatory budgeting discussion. I'd just like to leave us with a few thoughts when we're looking at our discussion ourselves this afternoon. And one is this word about debate. It's an interesting word. It's different than conversation. It's different than dialogue. Often with debates, you get very skillful speakers and not so skillful listeners. And so I think words are important, and as we move forward together, we want to think about what kind of words are we using and how will we create together our rules of engagement to have better outcomes. Collaboration is something that you see on your screen, and it is the future. And I think it's really exciting that at the City of Toronto, we're going to be having 3 new positions operating within the City Manager's Office. One will be a Chief Innovation Officer. One will be a Chief of Transformation. And the third will be a Chief of Resilience, a Chief Resilience Officer. Those 3 positions in and of themselves start to make us think about how are we going to operate differently in the future? How are we going to bring our divisions at City Hall together and think about working collectively in an integrated fashion to leverage up everybody's impact? And that should be the way that we're thinking no matter where we are, whether we're in the not-for-profit sector, whether we're in business, whether we're in government, and ideally, of course, bringing all those sectors together when we talk about how do we want to make our city the best it can be. So thank you very much. If you're needing more copies of Vital Signs, just let me know. We'd love to get them to your discussion tables.
Great. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. I appreciate that. So Paula, I think, is tied up upstairs, and we do have copies, though, of the introduction to the budget at the back and upstairs as well, if people are looking for some additional information about how we are educating people each year about the city's budget process. And when she joins us, I think we could press upon her to give us a brief introduction to that. But I'd just like to turn to you as well. Hi, welcome. To see if you had any questions for us about any of the things that we've talked about as well. But I'm really interested in your ideas too. And this idea of language, which I think is so important. One of the things that I'm always flagging is that people often use public consultation and public engagement interchangeably, and to me, public consultation is one way in which the city engages, and in other ways are the partnerships that we develop with others, the kinds of conversations our frontline staff have with residents in community centers or public health centers are all ways in which we're engaging. And then, of course, the more formal ways, deputations or elections as well. So there's a broad dynamic of engagement opportunities that we bring, but often we just call those consultations as well, which to me can be a little bit confining and doesn't allow us to reach out to some of that innovation as well. So I turn to you if you have any questions in the room for us, or you have any thoughts or ideas or things that you've brought to today that you'd like to share with us in terms of engagement itself. No questions for us? Have any of you ever participated in a public session like this, or on an issue in your neighborhood or community? Sorry, I saw your hand last minute.
Places are available because, as I said, I haven't participated in a long time, and sometimes you don't think about it.
Sure. Yeah, and I think Rich can talk a little bit about how he's been reaching out about participatory budgeting. And it is one of the biggest challenges that we have is to both get information to people, but also make sure people know about all the opportunities that are available to them to participate with their city or with local organizations. Well, it is a real challenge for us. So I'd be happy to hear from you about how you think we could do better in that as well, too. Yeah, it's hard. Like, how do you get your information about, in your neighborhood, about events or activities or?
I guess the most effective is through the news, TV news, radio. We do get a lot of paper delivered, to our homes, but who has the time to go and flip through all those pages? So, and your website as well, but then we have to kind of remember to go and check.
Yeah, sure.
So if you use the media to engage, to invite people, I think you will get more.
We had this debate about radio recently, about whether people thought that it was an effective communications tool too, and whether it's something that the city should be doing more of. We've kind of turned to print and to online and web, and yet radio was an issue I think you may have actually raised as well, that as a means of getting the word out too.
One of the things that's been interesting about participatory budgeting is, it's fun to be a pilot and be able to learn a bit. Being in these three communities, there's nothing that substitutes for actually just going to where people are. And so I'm finding what works best is that if we go into a community center on a Saturday morning and there's people there coming through for programming, and we start to say, oh, there's this project going on in your community, do you want to help us? And to structure it in a way that they don't have to commit a lot of time, but that they can contribute in like 5 or 10 minutes. And then they can go on. And the interchanges we've been having with people have been really great that way, and that people can say, oh yeah, well, while I wait for my son to swim or whatever, I'll tell you about this park in my community, and if you could build a park there. Now, me personally, my mind starts to think, whenever those conversations start, they open up other visions for how people are experiencing the city and their community. And they offer opportunities to talk about all sorts of things, like, oh, here's my idea for participatory budgeting, but another thing about there's this traffic problem on the corner, or the dogs in the park are dealing with, and I'm starting to think, just, me and my colleagues who are in this project, about how we use that input too, and how we channel that into all the other decisions the city makes. And I think that we're learning as we go that we need to be much more flexible to just be able to have conversations about anything. And that those conversations about anything can then start to ask, then focus on certain subjects. Like if we're talking about a park, maybe then it might turn around and talk about financial planning, or how houses are being built in those communities, or things like that. Those discussions are really great, and I think that with our limited resources, we're looking at how to be everywhere, and how to have neighbors spread the word to neighbors as well, that opportunities exist. And
it's interesting because the word of mouth is very important. I don't know how you have fun, but also we found that with counselors it's very important too. But some people don't register for their counselors' emails because that's not the counselor they may have voted for, or they don't know who their counselor is, and so sometimes we just have to try a whole bunch of different methods at the same time.
I just want to build on what Rich was saying, though, in terms of the idea of conversation or the idea of dialogue, because we can be surveyed and, take 5 or 10 minutes and put some ideas out. But the act of a conversation means that we're actually willing to listen and build our own knowledge. And so with the Vital Signs report, we not only want to build the knowledge, but we want to share the knowledge. And each of us learns something, many new things, when we put it together every year. So when you're having a conversation, the most enriching part of that is that you might be telling me about Gerrard Square, and I'm listening to something thinking, wow, I could use that in this other project that we're working on, and maybe we could collaborate and learn from each other on these things. And I think that that's where conversation or dialogue is so much different than debate, because the process itself is a process of building. And it is a process of listening and then integrating and then building on and with each other. So I love that part of the consultation piece. It's really the opportunity to learn more for each of us, and then to listen to our fellow residents, and to begin to build that, bond, social capital, trust, and the idea that we could work together if we actually knew each other a little bit better.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice to turn almost every exchange that you have with the city into some opportunity for conversation? It's just like, because we're all neighbors.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Anyone else? Andrew.
Oh, good. The microphones work. Hi. So my name is Andrew, and I guess because we're a small room, if it would be comfortable for everyone, but I was just wondering if we can just get a sense of who's in the room and why it is that we're all here, given that we're such a small group. I think part of what makes attending sessions like this interesting is also like knowing it's not just the engagement aspect, but it's also like, well, who else are interested in the things that I'm interested in, and just knowing that, because a lot of engagements that I would go to, I don't necessarily know who's in the room, and granted, if it's a very big engagement, it's hard to do that, but given that it's a small group.
We have some people online too, but certainly only if you're comfortable to let us know what your connection to today's session would be helpful as well. I know we have some staff. We have some technical staff in the back who are helping us out. Thank you very much. Anyone else want to just give just say why you're here and why this is important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess since
Andrew, you can
I
start for
suggested
sure. Yeah.
the thing, I could start. So I'm Andrew. A few years ago, I was involved with a group called Better Budget Toronto. It's a bit inactive at the moment, and we did recommend, it was during the time when the pilots were starting, and it was something that we were excited, so glad to hear that it's going. I haven't been engaged in budget issues for the last, I'd say, 2 years or now, so I'm kind of interested to just sort of learn and listen to your point and have a dialogue.
Anyone else?
What made you come to this one in Committee Room 1 today instead of the debates or anything like that? If you're just random.
Yeah.
Something interesting to learn here.
Yeah, sure.
And I do live close to Fairview area, so when you mentioned it, I am actually interested to see what's going to happen and how you're going to engage the people in that area. Because I'm sure you know, a lot of people that live in Fairview Mall area are now new immigrants to the city. Mm-hmm. They're learning to settle in Toronto, learn a new language, and they have their own set of ideas of how the city should be run. So one of the things that you can do probably is find out the places where you can reach out to them directly. A lot of them go to English classes during the day. The adults, children go, they're of course in school, but there are some public places where you probably can engage them more so that they feel included in planning.
Yeah, I'm really interested. I mean, one of the things in which our work is often reciprocal is that we would look, for example, to information that's published in Vital Signs to help us to better understand communities and change and challenge our assumptions about how to engage neighborhoods and to know a little bit more about them, to be able to understand what are emerging demographics. Is it changing from age, or new Canadians are coming, or it's very helpful for us to kind of get better at our outreach and our projects by seeing, how are we going to match what the objectives of this particular engagement is with the community's needs and interests as well. And just to Andrew's point, I mean, sometimes our sessions are huge and you don't get a chance to kind of get a good sense of whether we're accomplishing that or not. In a smaller environment, sometimes we can just, check show of hands, does this room reflect your neighborhood? It's one of the things that we're looking at in participatory budgeting is, are the people who participate, do they reflect the broader neighborhood, or have we missed or left someone out of the process? How could we do better next time to bring those people in? And again, interests are really important, right? Does it feel like something that's important to me now? I think myself, as a Torontonian, I was very interested in daycare issues when my kids were at that daycare issue, right? I was demonstrating for daycare, and now my kids are not in daycare anymore, and so now I have other issues which are interest to me. And so, how are we keeping up with those changing demographics as well? Andrew, or?
Well, I'd say, Meg, that as we start to think about things with a longer perspective. So I was interested to hear that this whole project is around, longer-term financial planning. That immediately puts a different lens on things.
Yeah.
And it introduces that notion of foresight. And for a city like Toronto, foresight and having that long-term view is extremely important in terms of managing the shifts and changes that we're experiencing in real time. So understanding the trends of where things are going and what we should be doing about them, the trends in transportation and affordable housing and childcare spaces, youth unemployment, all of those are really essential for us to be thinking about from a long-term perspective. Because if we get paralyzed with this notion that we're just dealing with this year's budget, we're not going to be able to really even begin to have a meaningful discussion about what are those bigger issues that we've got to figure out together, and really begin to think about each one of us as a resident in the city, and what additional role do we play? Where are we involved as a volunteer, or where might we work, or what organizations are we a part of, and how do we get that bigger discussion in? Because that's the power of community, to come as a resident for sure, and to have really great insights about the city that likely we all love and want it to be the best it can be. But to really start to think about, okay, well, what are the other connections that we have that we can bring to bear for these discussions, and really press pressure point on keeping the conversation as a long-term conversation, that we're not just having annual budget discussions or we're not just having four-year term discussions. We're really having a much bigger discussion that, if we all believe that we could really crack that discussion open, then I think we'd be willing to give a lot more time to it.
I have a question for Andrew. You said that you were briefly working with a group that is no longer active, or you're no longer active with it. I wasn't sure what you had said.
So at the moment, we're not particularly active. That's not to say all members are still interested in the issue, but we haven't met and actually have done work on the issue for the past two years, quite frankly. I was just finishing school, so I was more focused on trying to find work. So
yeah. I mean, I think people's interests change, and people are busy, right? They have lots of things in their lives to do: school, motherhood. What is it that the city can do to support your participation? What would help? What would make it easy to be involved? To know about the opportunities? How? I think when I started here at the city many years ago, one of the things that we did was we supported organizations and gave them tips and information about how to make effective deputations, for example, at City Hall. That was something that was a way for people to get engaged. But I kind of put it to you a little bit. What would help you to be able to participate more? Is it the timing? Is it locations? Is it the issue? Is it the focus? Is it meaningfulness? How is it that we can support you to feel supported in your engagement? Thoughts or ideas? So we brought cookies here today because we know that food is often a barrier for participation, and it's something that comes up a lot. People say, you know, I can't get there. Transit is unaffordable for me to participate, or the timing's wrong, or the location's wrong. But you know, food is also something that we see as a supportive thing to engagement as well. True.
So I would say that one of the things, and I think part of the reason back then that I sort of disengaged, is whether true or not, but the perception that I have is like, what's the point in me engaging if I don't know what my feedback, like how is my feedback being used? I don't always know that question. It's not clear to me how it's used. And you know, you're asking for people's time, and it's not clear to me how this consultation feedback is used. And so like we hear often about communities feeling over-consulted, and I understand where that perception comes from, where like I live in the Jane and Finch, I live on the south side of the Jane and Finch neighborhood, for example, and something that you hear with a lot of community groups there is like, we have been asked 1,000,000 times about what the city should do, and we don't see action. So why should we show up? Now, whether that is true or not, that perception is there, and that's kind of a bigger question, but like, how is that? And I think something that makes participatory budgeting exciting is that you can, the feedback is instantaneous, or at least it's a lot shorter. They can see instantly. I agree with you that foresight has to be part of the conversation, but people do want to like when they put themselves out there, they do want a reaction, and something like participatory budgeting builds that feedback loop in. If I put an idea out, within a couple of weeks, I can see that idea reflected back to me, and I can see my neighbors essentially react to it. And I think that is what makes participatory budgeting great. Like, it has that motivational aspect built into it. If I consult with the budget, like, I'm not entirely sure. And then I also agree with your point on language, like deputation, like who other than the city of Toronto, who uses that terminology, deputation, depute, it already, and then obviously city councillors, they have to hear this all the time usually. So I also understand where the city councillors are coming from, where they have to hear many of these things, and you get a sense like, are these councillors actually listening? But at the end of the day, they've also had a long day, so it becomes hard for them to listen. So I don't know where to really address it, but it comes to the question about like, well, if I give feedback to the city, how will it be used? That's not always clear.
Yeah, it is difficult, that feedback loop is very difficult.
There's an interesting model that was used in Chicago around vital signs reports and what was going on in the city. And they organized a evening where there would be dinner conversations taking place across Chicago. Mm-hmm. And we've done this in Toronto as well. And utilizing that power of conversation around food that you mentioned, Meg, is very important. But they also knew that it was important to know, okay, if we're asking people for their view, for their ideas, then we need to figure out how do we create a framework to actually take that input and invest in it. And so what they did is they took input from 1,000 dinners, and they looked at the ideas that were being surfaced, and they were able to pick a few of them to invest in and to incubate those ideas. So, Meg, when you ask us what should the city think about with these kinds of engagement sessions, it might be to be able to put some innovation funding into what is being talked about, that's being surfaced, that would seem to have the biggest impact. And that's how we might build people's sense of being more civically engaged, because they'll know that, the input is going somewhere, and they'll be able to see that direct link.
Hi. A few years ago, there was a deputation with the ex-mayor. He wanted to cut everything. For 2 days, about 48 hours straight. There were several people, including my brother, who was there, and the mayor did listen, and so did city councillors. There wasn't such a great cut, and I don't know if any of you remember that, but that was significant. So does your city councillors listen? Yes. Sometimes they need a push. Sometimes they don't need a push because they're on your side. But you're the one in the end who makes the decision if your city councillor is listening to you or your group. And if they are, great. If they're not, get them out. Get somebody that will listen to you.
It's a real mix, right? I mean, I think it is. Often when people come to a public meeting, we always say, don't use this, leave this as the only opportunity to have your say. You should call your councillor. You should come and make a deputation. Now I'm nervous using that word. I think we call them speakers, actually, at City Hall, and not deputations anymore. You know, try a variety of ways to have your impact, and don't feel that you just have this one opportunity to have your say as well. And those great elections we hold every 4 years is another way to have your say, too. Anyway. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jillian Sumi, and I'm here today because I'm interested in civic engagement, but I'm also here from, I want to give input to the city for myself, but I also want to speak on behalf of a lot of people with disabilities. And a lot of things that prevent people with disabilities from coming out is like the timing of event, the location of the event, and whether it's accessible. And when most people think of accessibility, it doesn't mean basically just physical accessibility. It means having the right supports in place to be involved. So it means having attendance. It means understanding like the terminology, because people with disabilities they may have different challenges in terms of understanding the terminology. So it means having the support to like ask questions to be able to understand what's going on sometimes. And it also means for all of us, whether you have a disability or not, we want to know whether our input is how it's going to be used, like how Andrew said. And that's kind of, in a nutshell, like some of the barriers that people with disabilities face. And when you're talking about youth employment, I'm speaking for myself, but they have an age range for people with disabilities when it comes to employment. But what happens if you're not within that age range anymore, but you're still looking for work and you still face barriers?
Thank you very much. It's very helpful for us. You know, I know we can always do better in all areas, including the feedback loop that we talked about, but also ensuring accessibility for sure. I'm very interested in your last comment too about age ranges and programs at the city too. It's been one of these things that our engagement with the public has really, keep changing our age range for youth to better reflect those communities too. And we have an advisory body now in order to help the city meet its AODA requirements. But they need constant input from residents as well. So, and
just to add on to the age range for people with disabilities getting employment, I finished school. I finished my studies for the time being a couple years ago, but I was like way past the age range of falling into categories, because I know for myself, and I don't know about other people with disabilities, but I know it takes them a while longer to finish their studies because they may have certain things that they have to deal with, so they don't always fall into the category of finishing school or their studies at a certain time frame.
I take your point. Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand the complexities of age of one, ability of the other. There may be language. All those things layer on to make even additional barriers for people as well.
I went to school in like Waterloo, Kitchener. So they recently, I think 2 years ago, had a trail survey where they just had a web map and you could just comment on the trail itself. And during that process, you could add your comment, but over time you could also see the whole conversation unfold. And then once they had that, they collected those results, and then they had their results on the website, but they also had actual meetings, so you could actually discuss the results of the community. And yeah, I found that a really cool process, and it's really easy to get involved. And then you stay engaged throughout the process as it goes, and you kind of see the full solution being rolled out. So I thought that was a really great way of doing things, and I know Toronto might have had some, I think TIA Core might have had some elements like that, but yeah, for people who need to travel or like have other things to do, like online engagement is a really great first step, and then they might get more involved, and it seems like a lot of people are.
It does seem to me, though, that, to Rich's question, sometimes we solve one problem by using an engagement tool, and we create another problem as well. And so one of the challenges we're having with participatory budgeting is that more and more people want to participate online for the ease of time and accessibility and just opportunities, multiple opportunities. And yet the notion of participatory budgeting, it's best when people come together around a table and face each other eye to eye and have to negotiate and build on each other's ideas and a sense of community that develops as well. And so we say, in order to be in the idea building phase, we really want you to come around the table and roll up your sleeves and participate in that way. But is that creating more barriers then for people to participate? And I must say, one of the challenges we do online is that most of our activity online is in English, right? So it's not very diverse in terms of language, and certainly in terms of the other technology barriers that people have, whether they have broadband available to them and are they on the go, and so those are big issues for us. It feels like we solve one problem and create another, which leads us to have multiple. We have sessions that are online, sessions that are in person. We have now been experimenting with facilitators for some of our consultations with lived experience. So for the poverty reduction strategy, we brought on over a dozen volunteers from the community who had lived experience in poverty. And so that was interesting for us. It means we have to trust a little bit, giving up some of our control over a session as city employees, but really it's more meaningful kinds of engagement. People see themselves reflected in the discussion in and of itself as well.
I just say that notion of co-creation is so important, that any of us now, if we want to get involved in something, we have to feel like we're there on the ground floor and we're building it together. So I think that engaging people in the discussion at whatever stage they're at, or however they've experienced it, it's a spectrum, right? So it's never one or the other, and the same things with technology. You can sometimes fast track things with technology and get more input on a mass basis, but are we strategically thinking about doing it for that purpose, and then surfacing the top 3 big questions or ideas, and then bringing people together to discuss further and build on it. So it's always a combination of things, but the combination has to be sort of thought through strategically to get the best outcome. I think that you'll have some people who will want to be participating all the way along.
Sure. And in those opportunities where we have the luxury of time as well, too. So sometimes it's an emergency issue we're trying to resolve, and we have to act quickly. In other cases like this, with the long-term financial plan, at least we've had a year to try to have consultations and discussions, online surveys and so on. There's multiple opportunities to be able to participate. But one of the things we've been trying really hard is to make all the output, so everything we receive in terms of input, and post it online. So in multiple forms, so high-level summaries, some of those themes. We've been really pushing all of our staff to put everything on open data, all the raw input that we get. And you raised the former administration, the former mayor ran a big public consultation called the Core Service Review. And we posted all of the input that we had, and people took up the challenge and reanalyzed all of that data to see whether we'd got it right. And you know, that's a new thing for staff, is to put all that raw data out and have people go through it, parse it, see if they came up with the same conclusions, let us know where we got it wrong or where we got it right as well. It's really, really helpful. But it's, you know, it's a lot for people, just a lot to ask people, and for some people that's of interest to them too. Any other thoughts or ideas around the room? Yes, sir.
My name is Rosalind. I work here in communications at the city. I work closely with Meg and Rich on a number of projects. And I think one of our key challenges, too, when you go back to the topic of accessibility and talking about words that we use, is how do we develop that plain language, clear, concise language, so that everybody can at least have a base understanding of that subject matter to even participate to start with, right? Because as you noted, if it's complicated, and we deal with a lot of complicated issues, whether it's budgetary issues, technical issues when it comes to roads or water, and how do we make that understandable so that you can even participate at the start, right? Because some people definitely have more education around certain topics and some people have none, but that shouldn't be a barrier for somebody to participate and be engaged, right, and provide their voice. So that's something that we spend quite a bit of time talking about with our colleagues and thinking about, you know, how do we get that out there and how do we make it understandable for everybody too, and where are they coming from, right? Because if you don't understand, you can't participate. So it is something that we do spend a lot of time thinking about, but, you know, there's always ways we're looking to improve and refine. We're looking, especially in this diverse city, at translation as well, right? How do we get that out there in multiple languages for people so that not only English-speaking people who, you know, are able to participate too and meaningful. And, you know, as you mentioned, with a large number of immigrants coming into the city and people who aren't starting out with that base foundation, how do we get there?
Do people find it difficult to find the answers to the questions that they have about the city? I mean, where do you go to get information about your city? What's your first place that you turn to? The city's website or another website? Is it the city's website? Do people know about 311? Yeah? Rich and I were very interested when we were working on the Participatory Budgeting project out in the community that very few people knew about 311 as being the one phone number to call for information, but also there was a great distrust of 311, the sense that if you called it, you weren't really going to get to the person. So people were always saying to me, I know it's 311, but can you tell me who I really need to call to get stuff done? Because it's 311. No, but who do I really need to call? It's 311. So I always like to check with the room. But do people know what 211 is? Does anyone know what 211 is? So 211 is like the 311, but of community organizations and supports as well. So if you're interested in finding a local group that's working on an issue, you're trying to connect with a food bank, a service organization, if you contact 211, that's the route to find out about non-government services and organizations. And I don't know, is the foundation would be something you would connect with through 211? Do you know, Rosalind?
I hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah, so not 411, not 911, not 311, but 211 is the other way to connect as well, because we know that some people, as we were talking earlier, their connection to the city is sometimes just through the community first, and so there may be an organization that's working in your area of interest or in your neighborhood that you might also want to connect with too. But I'm always surprised that very few people know about 211. We have about 5 more minutes left before we are moving to a break, and encouraging people to either stay and continue this conversation with us or attend another one of the sessions. I did also want to highlight that My City, My Six is a group that's in between these two rooms here, and they're collecting your 6-word story about Canada and we would say Toronto as well. So we invite you to join them on your way out as well. We also have, we did provide guides upstairs. I'm hoping that people were able to pick up, which is an introductory guide to the city. Talks about how government works, how to find out who your councillor is, how to get engaged. And this is full booklet that's available here from the city clerk's office, and this is a postcard if you wanted to access that information online as well. If you have any parting thoughts for us, we have, as I said, a few more minutes, and questions too. Sometimes I think the greatest action sometimes come out of a great, ripe, wonderful question. We have stickies, which we encourage you to write out your ideas and thoughts so they're not going to get lost. Each of you should have a workbook for this afternoon. Please ensure that you put your ideas down in that workbook. And then we've launched an online version of the workbook as well, so you can contribute your thoughts and ideas after you leave today's session. Wake up in the middle of the night like I do most nights with a long list of things to do. Certainly go online and complete a survey at that time. And then I think that all of us are going to stay here too, so if you have any questions about our specific projects or the issues that we're working on, we're happy to stay and chat with you too. But does anyone have any kind of closing thoughts or questions that they'd like to leave with us and move on to the next group? We have one there at the back. I'm sorry? Yeah, whichever.
There's a little button there you can press on.
Okay, so I'm a student. Yes, I'm a student. Oh. And so as a person who receives education daily, I personally think that education is a really important thing. And so educating the people about how to become engaged and how to put your voice out there and get your ideas heard is really important. And so that is one of the main motivations that I come here with, because really I'm only here because we have a civic project, but also because I have an interest in how to become more engaged with the City of Toronto.
So I direct your attention to this wonderful guide. If you want a full copy of it, as I said, they're here. There's a long list of ways to get engaged. I'll make a little plug for one little project I have, and please come and talk to me if you'd like. We have introductory guides to the city that are available here as well, with the role of council and committees and so on. And one of the guides that we're working on right now is about public engagement itself and all the ways you can get engaged. And I'd be happy to take volunteers on to work with me on that project as a way to engage people in that too. I want to make sure we get the language right. I want to make sure we get the tone right. I want to make sure that we aren't missing gaps in new ways that people want to get engaged as well. So if you're interested in that, I'll just give you our email address is engagement@toronto.ca. We try to keep it simple. And certainly, I think it is really important to not only say, here's an opportunity to get engaged now, but here's all the ways in which you could get engaged with the city too. Any other closing thoughts? We have one over here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hania. I am nurse in my country, and I am honored my class. I come here for studying more and experience more, and I take care of some children. I have the problem with this family. He put me out the house. Now I not have any work, anything. But sorry, I not speak good English. What the government help the newcomers in the Canada for the fund? The fund is the fund these people and give her the good way for continuing his life in Canada. And thank you.
And let's talk afterwards too. I just want to make sure you're connected with the right staff here at the city too. It is interesting. I think all of us are striving to be full citizens of Toronto. We want opportunities that are easy and accessible and relevant to us, and we want to know that our government services and programs and activities reflect the needs of Toronto now and also in the long term, and how are we going to be prepared to be able to offer those programs and services, but also to fund them, and how are we going to balance both our priorities and goals as individual citizens and as a city as a whole, and how are we going to make sure that we're a stable, sustainable municipal government too. So I thank you both for coming. We're as I said, we're going to stay and continue this conversation. It's time now for us to have a break, and I encourage you to take up another session if you'd like, or to continue with us again this afternoon. But I thank you all for coming and participating. Thank you.